Gail and Kavita, I was at the local shopping center the other day, and we have a chain of stores called the Reject Shop. Now, for those who are not familiar with the Reject Shop, it's a chain of stores a bit like your dollar shops, but with a slightly higher price point on average. The executive leadership of the Reject Shop some time ago made an announcement saying that they hadn't been profitable for quite a while, and so we're going to shut down the vast majority of these stores. However, in this shopping center, the Reject Shop remained open. And I was curious as to why that was. So I've been watching them for quite a while. And the only difference that I could perceive was that of the store manager. She spends a fair bit of time on the floor and even mans the checkout counters as well. And as she does that, she chats her customers up, inquires after their lives and so on and so forth. And I've been observing this for a while, and in relation to our conversation today, I couldn't help but think that the idea of resilience in leadership would normally bring up this idea of being made of Teflon or being as tough as nails. But my takeaway from observing this manager would be that it's more about having a real desire to build people up and in a way that they appreciate, and being flexible enough to deliver outcomes that makes a difference to them. Given that you've co-authored a book on the rise of the C19 leadership, would you say that in some way my takeaway is related to this, or rather related to your observations on or around resilience in leadership?
Absolutely. I actually think the example of the store manager is pretty much speaking to Gail and my definition of a C19 leader.
I hit the nail on the head, so to speak. Excellent. Welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, where I interview people with a wealth of experience and expertise like our guests today, Gail Gibson and Kavita Satwalekar. I hope I said that right, to explore aspects of how they create predictable business success for themselves and perhaps for others as well. Now, Gail, we were talking before, you are an award-winning and accredited performance and leadership coach. You've been doing this for a while. I'm curious, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
That's a great question. My personal area of strength, I think, is the performance work that I do. So it's the mindset. So when I first set up my business, I was finding that I was developing and working with people more on their mindset. So a lot of people were coming to me for coaching and they were wanting to improve their businesses. But what I quickly discovered was people wanted to improve their own performance. So they needed to work through such things, such leadership skills as developing confidence, to be able to stand up, to present their business. But more than that, it was to develop the skills to have conversations with people, effective conversations that were going to be winning conversations as a result. So I focused the intention of my coaching then hugely on the performance development. So what I do now is help business and corporate leaders to achieve their peak personal performance, because I'm a firm believer, and this supports all of the work that Kavita and I do, I'm a firm believer that in order for a leader to be able to shine, or anybody to be able to lead themselves, they have to self-lead first. So they have to develop the person that they are to then become the leader that they want to be in whatever it is in their life. But I think so it's the performance that is my key strength, and it really gives me a buzz when I get to see people really developing themselves and sustaining that performance in all that they do in life.
And what would you say in that area of strength is something that businesses don't know but should?
I don't think it's that they don't know. I think it's that they don't know how to do it some of the time. So a lot of the time, and the work that both myself and Kavita have been doing for many years, and particularly during the last 12 months, we've noticed that so many leaders they're burning out, and their teams are burning out as well, because they're not always focusing on the people. They've been trying to adapt and change and meet the targets and meet the business strategy and goals that are there presented. However, during this very challenging time, they are some of them are failing to see what's right in front of them, and that's their people. And so their people's performance has been radically reduced. And this is why people are having mental health issues. They're having this burnout that we've seen and we've witnessed across many industries. And it's a vital time for leaders to actually engage with their teams and to realise that they need to put themselves first and work on their own personal performance, and then they need to role model this out toward their teams so that their teams can embrace whatever works for them to create a sense of self, but also a performance level that they can go to achieve. And I'm talking mind, body, and inner self as well. So it's this holistic approach to being able to perform at your personal best.
Okay. And Gail, I know that was a very brief intro. Is there anything else that we should be aware of about yourself?
Not at this time. I think let's see where the
Sure.
conversation goes, but I'd love to let Kavita have a chance to share her story as well.
And Gail, you've co-authored this book with Kavita, The Rise of the C19 Leadership. The tagline, I believe, is See Beyond and Become the Leader You Are Born to Be.
That's correct.
Kavita, my understanding is you are an emotional wellness advocate, the founder of Inner Sense Consulting, and to which you bring about 14 odd years of experience in executive coaching and organizational development. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And what would you say is your personal area of strength?
So I'd say that my personal area of strength is actually my tagline, which is Inner Sense by Kavita. The idea is to empower clients to make sense of their inner worlds and hence enable them to lead from within. And that actually speaks a lot to that emotional well-being factor as well. When people take the time to actually make sense of their inner worlds, to understand their values, to understand how their values are coming forth into the world, that is when, they automatically address any kind of discrepancy between how they behave and how they value certain things in life. And right from there is where authentic leadership starts, and this overall well-being that goes along with it, and with being an empowered leader who can actually go out there and empower their teams starts.
Okay. And I'll ask you the same question I asked Gail. What in that area of strength is something that you would say businesses don't know but should?
In my belief and in my experience, I have realized that it's that time that people don't take to actually sit down and understand what is important to them. A lot of leaders have never actually sat down and thought about their leadership styles. They haven't thought about what makes them tick. They haven't thought about what makes their people tick. So when they sit down, when they go through coaching, when they go through mentoring, they actually have that time to understand this at a deeper level. And when they understand it, it becomes easier and easier for them to live it. And so yes, they need to learn new tools. Yes, they need to learn new techniques, because this is just part of how we thrive as human beings, with that constant learning. But it's also sitting back and having that white space and having that quiet time and really figuring out what needs to happen before just reacting and putting out fires on a day-to-day basis.
So my takeaway would be, listening to both of you, is that you invest, or at least encourage people to spend a fair bit of time with introspection in terms of their own abilities and what they're actually doing before they decide to change course or tactics or anything of that nature. Would you say that the definition of leadership is inadequate given your perspectives, or is it just something that we should take note of and in order to tweak the way we operate?
I personally wouldn't say that the definition of leadership is inaccurate. I would say that given the changing times, that definition needs to change as well. And how we measure leadership needs to start being altered. So it now needs to be measured with slightly different parameters. We need to now include, for example, emotional intelligence as a given for any leader. We need to have aspects of empathetic leadership, of collaboration, of so many other aspects of leadership that were always good to have in the past, but are now becoming more and more mandatory to include as part of the definition of a good leader. Yeah. I'll actually pass it along to Gail and see what
No,
she
I
might have
think
to add.
those are very key points that you have addressed there. It's really about, it's leadership is now about the people approach, isn't it? And we have noticed that more than anything. And I think we've seen this globally as well, that the organisations and the leaders who are shining and their teams and organisations are shining are those who have gone back into this introspective time, and they've really, really embraced who they have in front of them and how important and vital those people are to them. But then on the side of that is the vitality of how they are feeling, and this check-in, this whole well-being, and this whole, the reality is, how are you? And asking that question a lot more. And those are the things that we're seeing, that, as Kavita said, the definition of leadership needs to change. It needs to be tweaked slightly, but it's all for positive reasons. And I think, if nothing else, this recent crisis that we're going through has shown us that maybe we had lost sight of that in leadership in our lives. And now this has given us that chance, that kind of in our face chance to just go, what, the people are the ones who matter. And so as leaders and as teams of people who can go on to become leaders in their own, we have to focus on the people first. And so that has to be, people needs to be the key for leadership going forward.
Traditionally, I would say in a lot of conversations I've had, there has been a focus on soft skills of people when you talk about recruitment or leadership. Would you say that this is really an extension of what we have traditionally viewed as soft skills?
I definitely think it is. And I think for a long time, the whole idea of soft skills should have never been given that label. I think they have been vital throughout any people development work that anybody has been delivering, whether it is leadership, whether it is coaching. Soft skills, they are skills, they are leadership skills. And Kavita and I do a lot of work with women leaders as well, where we run self-leadership programs. And this is what I was talking about right at the start. And as Kavita was as well, we have to develop the people. We have to develop the individual first. If we don't prepare the individual with these self-leadership skills, which they may have called soft skills previously, they're not going to be able to step into the arena to become a successful, and as we like to call them, C19 leader, so that they can take forward these skills, keep developing them, keep mastering them and sustaining them for the long term. And then they start to create this ripple effect outwards. But it has to start with self.
Okay. Brilliant. I think it'd be appropriate to explain to listeners what you mean by C19 leadership or leaders, and give us a bit of context around that.
Okay, so Kavita, why don't you tell the wonderful story of how the idea of C19 came up?
Absolutely. So as Gail and I have written this book together, but what you may not know is that each and every word of the book has been written together. Through this pandemic, Gail and I would get on Zoom calls, and that was our focus session. And we would come up with chapters and we would start writing. And I think on one such occasion, I had just moved from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur, and it was a gorgeous, stormy afternoon. Yes, that's my
one of her favorites.
Coming out. Love the rain, love the storms, love the lightning. But yeah, so it was one of those afternoons, and I have realized that I think the best, or I think my best, when it's times like this, when the weather is cooperating in my mind. But Gail and I, I think at that point we'd written a few chapters of the book, and we were coming back and writing the preface and focusing on that aspect of it. And Gail started talking about how we need to see beyond today's current leader. We need to focus on the future. And that's where our conversation was going. And all of a sudden, a little light bulb went off. I wouldn't say I was struck by lightning, but a light bulb did go off. And we've been living that reality for the past year, only that was the alphabet C and 19, and just decided to do a play on words and change what C19 meant. And so made it SEE 19, as in see beyond and become that leader you are born to be. So that's how the chapter title came about. And initially, both Gail and I were like, it's really nice, but let's sit with it for a bit because it may be a bit too corny. but the more we shared it with our inner circles, the more people started appreciating the fact that we were looking at C19 in a slightly different light, and we were being forward focused and focusing on what can be next. So that's how the chapter title came about. And Gail, do you want to maybe jump into and explain why we wrote the book?
Yes. So why we wrote the book was we have, through our experience, particularly in the last 12 months with the work that both of us have been doing, we were privileged to work on a big contract together in one of the neighbouring states to Malaysia. And we were noticing the shortfalls in leadership that were happening. And we've touched on some of the things that we have addressed in the book already in this conversation. But what we wanted to bring together was a new way of thinking as well. So we wanted to add value to the existing leadership training and thought processes that were going on, but we wanted to elevate it to the next level. So we have decided that the C19 leader is already an emotionally intelligent leader, but we take their emotional intelligence to the next level. So we created a 8-pillar approach, which is a hybrid model that we've created. Now, what I mean by hybrid is we wanted to focus on historically, and it still exists in leadership training today. We often talk about male leadership skills and women's leadership skills, and we know what's happened through the pandemic, and there's been this upward drive toward women who've maybe been more successful than men. But we wanted to create a book that talked to all leaders. So we have taken a very gender neutral approach, and we wanted to respect the changing nature of identity of people as well. So we have removed gender completely from our book. So we talk about the C19 leader just as a person, as a human being. So we've brought together the best traits of both, and we know that historically there have been outstanding traits from male leaders and outstanding traits from females, and we have molded these together to enable C19 leaders to rise above, as we say, and also to really focus on what does it mean to be more emotionally intelligent. What do I need to do? We talk about listening more deeply, being collaborative in our approach, shifting the hierarchy. They're just various, and adapting quickly to lead effectively. So those are just touching on. But then we also talk at great length, the 4 other chapters are really about the self. So we talk about dreaming big, and we're talking about being the best you can be. And then we also talk about nourishing your mind, body, and soul. So becoming this continual learner. So it's a complete holistic approach to leadership, respecting diversity and inclusivity of identity. And as we say, it's about elevating people to the next level so that they can become these incredible C19 leaders that we know we can develop and work with going forward.
You've got 8 pillars, as you put it in this book. Could you talk us through them and what it entails in terms of someone who's trying to develop themselves to be that kind of leader?
Okay, do you want to do the first 4 and I'll do the second 4, Kavita?
Sure, Gail, sure.
Go in the book order?
Yeah, we'll go in the order of the book. So the idea is, again, you have to make sense of your own self. You have to focus on your own self-leadership before you can actually go out there and become that leader that you want to be for your teams. The first pillar is about dreaming big and actually becoming that leader that you truly do want to be led by. So it's, again, this part goes a little bit into introspection, but it goes into some sort of a reflection activity. And through the book, you'll notice that there's very practical, thought-provoking questions and statements and activities that we have involved. So as you read through the book, even though, as you might have noticed, it's a very quick read, the idea is that it's enough to get you to start thinking and mulling over your leadership style and then moving forward with it. So the first pillar is about becoming the leader that you want to be led by and thinking through what that means. The second pillar talks about authenticity. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
if I can just clarify. With this, you're really trying to flesh out who you want to be as a leader. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and taking instance of the fact that you may not quite be what you want to be. Okay, and establishing the gap. Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm jumping a bit ahead right now, but the idea behind reading this book is to start thinking about who it is that you want to be as a leader. And then you don't have to be left alone to do it, because Gail and I, when we wrote the book, we hadn't thought of this aspect of it. But as people started reading the book and we started getting feedback from them, they were like, okay, we need a little bit more. We need a little more hand-holding. We need a little bit more from you as the authors of the book. So that's when Gail and I decided, and we created a mentorship program. And that mentorship program is an annual mentorship program that we run for companies, where the 8 pillars are covered through 8 sessions or through 8 months. And then the other 4 months are left for the mission and the values of the company and anything else that they would like us to embed in their leaders as a company moving forward. Yes, the idea is to get the juices flowing with the book, but then there's more help if required beyond that as well.
Okay. I'm curious, do you encourage people to examine their motivations? To examine their motivations when taking on a leadership position?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, Gail and I were on a panel discussion with a few PhD and MBA students, and that came up as one of those questions. And Gail and I have very different stories with this one, because as you know, I come from a background of psychology and organizational development. And to me, being a leader was something I dreamt about doing, because I had this phenomenal teacher who was my first mentor ever, who basically drilled it into me that being a leader is not about going out there and being the boss. It's not about going out there and making more money. It's not about going out there and having the last statement in a conversation. It's about truly bringing out the best in the people who you are managing and ensuring that they are actually wanting to do the work as opposed to being forced to do the work out of fear. So she brought about that whole concept of leading with intention versus leading with fear.
Which raises an interesting point, because there are organizations out there where there is such a big focus on numbers as opposed to people. How do you balance the two?
For now, just look back at the past year and see how the companies who mainly focus on numbers have done. See how their leaders have been flustered. And right there, you'll notice that maybe too much emphasis was put on the numbers. So the idea is, yes, we need the numbers, but also the attention needs to be maybe moved a little bit from the numbers, put towards the people, because when the attention is put on the people, those numbers automatically grow. And I'll give Gail a chance, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the recent masterclasses we ran for an organisation, we quickly discovered that this was a very numbers-driven organisation. And what we were getting, these people didn't know us at all. And so this was an introductory session to talk about the concept of C19. But during the call, Kavita and I started to get a lot of private messages on the screen that the leaders in the teams were not wanting to share publicly, but it was touching on a lot of these points that we don't spend enough time listening to our people. We are expected to do this and expected to do that and to meet targets. So what you're saying is there's been a lot of underlying murmurings, I think, amongst leadership teams who are very numbers driven and very profit driven as a result. We all know that businesses need to make a profit to keep the people in the system and to keep the companies going. But we noticed this direct impact where people were going, but we need to reach out, we need to talk more, we need to work on these realistic expectations, etc., etc. And we were pleasantly surprised that they took faith in us to have those conversations with us, but at the same time, we realize that there is a very big issue that needs to be addressed, which is what we address through our mentorship program.
Have you come across any research to back up this? I think most people will intuitively recognize the fact that we should invest in people and certainly keep them as a priority as opposed to numbers. But when you're dealing with leaders who essentially take their orders from a CEO or a board of directors that are very much numbers focused, it's a bit hard to go against the grain. And I was wondering if there's a research or in that space that could counter that sort of viewpoint.
Personally, I haven't seen any direct research yet, but I believe that what's going to fall out of last year is a lot more white papers that are going to address the differences, the shortfalls, the differences between purpose-driven, people-driven organisations and profit-driven organisations at the stage that we're at. I think because it's a prolonged epidemic that we're still experiencing, I think there's room to develop these figures. And that is one of the differences between our book. I know we're jumping around here, but I just wanted to bring this back. One of the differences between our book and other leadership books is ours is purely experiential. So everything in the book is based on our personal experience of leadership, given our backgrounds, as well as our last 12 months worth of direct experience. And we brought this up in another interview we had just recently, didn't we, Kavita? Where, and as you say there, Vinay, a lot of leaders, and especially when they're presenting something like an opportunity to work with myself and Kavita to their CEOs, they will say, where's the theory behind it? Where is the proof that what these two leadership coaches are saying is true? And it's a fine line, but I think it's in the engagement that we have with organisations that has won us the opportunity to present C19 to their teams.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Sorry, I digressed a bit from the 8 pillars.
That's okay. So did I a little bit, but I wanted to bring it back.
So dream big. I think we've got a handle on that particular concept, and you've described the fact that you've got some questions to provoke thinking, and it helps people take into account the what could be and the as is and the gap that exists. But your second pillar is be you. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So the second pillar is be you. It's about where that authenticity comes out. It's about knowing that you can be competent and you can be likable. So not in the book, we haven't in particular addressed unconscious biases, but this was our thinking, Gail and my thinking when we came up with this chapter was to try and address some of those unconscious biases of how leaders who are competent are not necessarily likable, and leaders who are likable may not necessarily be viewed as competent. So that's what that next pillar in short actually talks about as well. And it gets you to self-reflect on your biases, your unconscious biases that you might need to start paying more attention to as you go through life on a day-to-day basis.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
So it was really interesting as Gail and I were writing this chapter, we were actually focusing on ourselves too. So we've gone through these activities, we've gone through all the introspection, and we've done everything that we're asking our readers to do through the book. So we know it works. But an example, gosh, I'm struggling a little bit to pinpoint exactly one, but I remember going through multiple occasions as we were writing this chapter. I would go back and I just pay attention to what I was doing. I've got 2 teenagers at home, and I was starting to pay attention to maybe my expectations from them based on, I have 1 girl and 1 boy. Now my unconscious biases are actually opposite than what the norm is. For example, my daughter is the older one. She's an athlete. She's a competitive swimmer, and she is very physically and mentally strong, right? So she is my child who I drive my strength from. She's my rock. And on the other hand, my son, even though he is an athlete, he has always played second fiddle to his older sister. And he turns around and like in little games, in Hindi it's called panja, but it's basically the arm wrestling. So my boy would come up to me and say, Mom, I don't think I'm ever going to win arm wrestling with Dee, right? Didi is what he calls his sister. And I go, No, sweetheart, don't even try, because he is a soccer player and her stroke is butterfly. Just in that, there is that little difference. So my unconscious bias, for example, I have two left feet, and I think we had hiked up a bunch of stairs to go to this one place in Kuala Lumpur. And coming down the stairs, normally I would look for a railing. And because this was COVID times, I didn't. And I decided to lean on a child of mine. I automatically leaned on my daughter. My son is taller. He is bigger built. My daughter is shorter than I am. But because I know she's stronger, I just leaned on her. So I started then paying attention to how my behavior was also affecting my son in his thought process that yes, my sister is stronger than me and I should never bother to even arm wrestle with her. Just little things like that. Again,
Certainly.
this is a small aspect of how I lived it in my day to day. I wasn't going into the office. I wasn't with a client at that point, but I started paying attention to my biases and they started playing up in different ways within my family itself. So yeah, Gail, would you have an example to share? Maybe along these lines
No,
as
that
well?
was such a brilliant example. I was just reflecting on the Maya in our book, actually, and the example in our book in the chapter about likability and competency. So in our book as well, Vinay, we have two case study leaders. So we have Maya and we have Jeff. And so we wanted to use them as the thread throughout the book. So each chapter has a case study relating to their behaviours, their leadership style, their values, all of the parts of what makes up a C19 leader. And so they have strengths and they also have areas for improvement as well. So in the second chapter that Kavita's talking about, Maya was running a team of 16 engineers, and she'd been very previously, this was unfamiliar territory to her. She hadn't run teams like this before, and again, with the remoteness of the work that she was doing. And what she was finding is instead of focusing on her strengths as a leader and thinking about what she brought to the team, she was spending more and more time learning what was going on in the organisation and what the engineers were doing. And so she very quickly started to be firefighting. She was constantly playing catch up. And she didn't want to, what she was struggling, was she appearing competent, or was she trying to be liked by everybody? Because she was showing them that if I show them that I want to understand what they're doing, will they like me more? But then am I overlooking the fact that if I don't stand up and present myself as their leader, that they can build trust and respect and we can build that as a team? Am I not showing that I am a competent person as well? So she was challenged by that. So that was her, how does she bridge that gap and find that sweet spot so that she is perceived by her team and her fellow leaders in the organisation to be a likeable and competent leader?
I'm thinking of something that's come up quite a bit in recent conversations with managers and leaders, in that at times, given their personality, they may not be quite as vocal. And in many organizations, it's easy to look at the most vocal person and think that you can attribute a whole number of leadership qualities upon them, when in fact your best players are fairly quiet. How, as being one of those people, those fairly introvertish type individuals, would you suggest we change our way of engaging people in order to be noticed? Or, and again, I'm not sure if this is exactly a good fit as an example or an issue given this particular pillar, but I'm curious as to what advice you would give such people.
I'll take this one. I think that really taps into chapter 6. So we'll just jump ahead with the chapters here. Chapter 6 is about shifting the hierarchy and being more collaborative. And what I've noticed from my experience is when we have those introverted and those more quiet people, again, it comes back to the teams and the leaders who allow the people within their teams to have their voices heard. And so it's one of the key aspects of the Women's Self-Leadership program that we're currently running. And we had a lot of the women come forward to us and say, but I want my voice to be heard and I want to learn how to step up and to be able to speak out diplomatically, but also with strength so that I can share my strengths with the rest of the team. So within these teams, when we are more collaborative in our approach, we allow that idea of curiosity to emerge. So again, teams that have been successful allow everybody to come together. And when we shift the hierarchy, we come into a room and it's completely equal. So when we're sitting around that table together, every idea that is contributed is accepted. We respect everything that people are saying as well. And so by doing that, even the quietest person in the room will take it upon themselves to feel that they have something to value, something of value to add, so that they will be, as you said, and I've noticed this myself a lot in the work that I've done over the years in all different roles I've had, is when you allow that quiet person to step up and actually contribute to the room, it's incredible how creative they are. But it also, what it does is it builds that person's confidence, and it builds the fact that, wow, I am part of this team. Somebody is listening to me. Somebody is recognizing me. And then with that collaboration as well, these people step up, and then they step up into responsibility as well, because with this non-hierarchical idea of collaboration, the importance is for a leader to step back and actually say, let the team fly with the idea. And so get them to report back, get them to create the solutions, whatever it is, whatever issue it is, whatever strategy they're wanting to create, let them take charge of it, let them contribute to it, let everybody have a voice heard, and then they can build this whole sense of this culture that they're building where they feel respected, they get their voice heard, and the quiet ones can level up a little bit and become a bit more extroverted as and when it's required. They don't have to step up and be the most extroverted person on the planet, but they can bring their curiosity and creativity to life. Anything to add, Kavita?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that the idea behind this would be to take a safe space and to actually turn that into a brave space, so that the slightly more introverted individuals or team members actually feel brave enough to just voice their opinion and then take it from there.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, you're really saying that even though it's about leadership, but it's also about culture. Because if the culture doesn't change, you having an individual with the right perspective isn't going to change things in an organization.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've heard the term culture of care, culture of well-being, where all of these concepts are still so new. If I circle back to that earlier question you had asked about research that's available on, some of these soft skills, we're still dealing with COVID. We're still dealing with the repercussions and with the research. Every day we're learning something new about the virus or a mutation of the virus. I would say that any data that might be out there about what used to be known as a soft skill would be a little bit outdated, because mainly through this last year, what has emerged is the fact that it's not necessarily only the soft skills, but it's the soft skills at the next level that now need to be included as part of the leadership parameters. So the research on that, for example, will start coming while people work on it, now that it's come to mind, now that they're looking at a term such as relational leadership. The term may have existed in theory. I think maybe somewhere I might have read about it when I was doing my master's, but I never paid attention to it, even though that is who I am as a leader. So these things will start coming to light now, and we'd start building them into our vocabulary as leaders moving forward.
Certainly. Okay. And touching upon what you were saying, you also talk about self-care. How does that fit into the whole picture?
The whole idea is twofold, right? One, if you take care of yourself, you're better able to take care of the people around you, right? That concept of put your mask on before helping others. We heard it in so many different versions throughout this last year that it may have been an overkill, but you know what? It is reality. Your cup has to be full. And I had read a statement a while ago that basically said, always give from your overflow and never from your cup. Because if you give from your cup, you are going to feel depleted at some point in time. But if you give from your overflow, you're always giving joyously. So it's that, again, that same concept, right? Of take care of yourself before you take care of the people around you. But the other aspect, which is sometimes hidden in the corporate world, at least for leaders, is if a leader actually takes that time to take care of themselves, you're demonstrating to your team that you value it and that they need to start doing it too. So it's a little bit twofold in that aspect. I had a boss once back in the US, one of my favorite leaders of all times. And for him, he decided 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, he was going to leave work come hail or sunshine. He was going to go surfing, and that was that. His weekend started on a Friday afternoon. It ended on a Sunday. Every other day of the week, he would work till whenever he had to. He'd get all of his work done. But 2 p.m. Friday, he was nowhere to be found. He was off the grid. That then started forcing the rest of the team to start paying attention to what it is that we needed to do in order to get all of our work done before 2 p.m. on a Friday. And that actually enabled the whole team then to go out and leave at 2 o'clock on a Friday, because we just got everything we needed to done more efficiently. And this guy, he still brings a smile to my face every time I think about him. He is now a professor at Stanford University, and he lives his dream. He does exactly what he wants to do, but he's empowered this whole lot of people who have worked for him along the way. And as Gail mentioned, through our book, we've got our two case study leaders, and both Maya and Jeff are not only a blend of Gail and myself, because we have both been in the corporate world and we are both active leadership coaches, but it's also a blend of some of the best leaders that we have found along the way. And the feedback that we've been hearing from our readers is that they see themselves in both Maya and in Jeff. The idea, again, is to let everyone know that there is aspects of every good leader in each and every one of us. It's about honing in on what is important to us, what ties in with our values, and building up if we feel that we've left that somewhere along the way. And self-care is just one of those pillars that often leaders forget about.
How would you help someone actually become aware of self-care? Because I know for some people, and I'm using a very broad stereotype here, but let's call them type A personalities, they would probably be more focused on achieving goals or certain objectives at the cost of anything and everything in order to achieve that. And if you talk about self-care, they'll say, I'm right. I can keep going. I'll be right. How do you help them become more cognizant of what they're doing and the potential impacts of taking time out for themselves?
Okay, yeah, I'll take this. One of the first things that, and I've worked with somebody like that, I coached somebody like that, and what I did was I got them to reflect on what was the reality of what was working for them, and what were the goals that they were working toward. And I wanted them to paint a picture for me of exactly what they were achieving. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the goals that they were working on in their organization, how did they meet them? How did they make them happen? How did that impact on the team that they were working with as well? And I said, and we found out that they were, one of the things that came up straight away was the amount of time that this leader was taking to achieve the goals that they were taking. And because I focus my coaching work on peak personal performance, and self-care is at the heart of that, mm-hmm. I was able to encourage my client to think very deeply about the fact that what was their out of work experience? What did that look like? And what was their relationship like with themselves, with their family, their social life, all of those things. And for this client, it was the first time that anybody had asked those type of questions of them, to actually say, I'm here, this is a leadership coaching opportunity, and we're focusing on what I need to do to become a better leader. But it was equally as important to address with this leader, but what is the reality of you in terms of your own leadership style outside of work? So the social and the personal level of performance became the one thing that we focused on. And my client ended up taking that very introspective look at his own life, and he realized that he wanted to change. And I think this is what was the encouragement that came through, was he wanted to change because he wanted to move away from just focusing all the time on the work that he was doing, and it was consuming his life. And yes, he was achieving high targets, but there was so little left in that cup that Kavita mentioned before. He was giving continually from inside the cup. There was no overfill. There was nothing more for him to give. And he realized that he was becoming very unhealthy. His sleeping habits were very erratic. His nutrition in his diet were very bad as well. So it was a snapshot in time for him to take that step back and transform his life. And as a result, after our coaching had finished and he had created a plan for himself, a self-care plan alongside his goals to achieve as a professional, he then went on and really transformed his life. But more than that, he has sustained his self-care routine, and he now is a much more successful, and he says to me in himself, because we still check in with accountability sessions a few times a year, and he said to me that he just feels that as a leader, as a person, he is performing much better for his own, and the people around him have taken notice, his team have taken notice, and his family as well, and he just feels a much more settled and calmer person. So I think the bottom line is, it's the leaders who give themselves a chance to do that introspection. And I'm sure you'd agree with me too, Kavita. When people do take that time to step back, and within our coaching work, we give them that space and that opportunity to reflect, to think about who they do want to become, and then we help them get there.
I'm just curious. I understand the introspection side of things, but is there an activity or a set of questions, like you said before, that would help a person think through where they are at now?
Yes, it goes through the values. It goes through the values questions. There's an example of values questions in the book, but I also have within my toolkit, I use 15 deep questions that I give to my clients to go away from. In the first few sessions when I'm working with people, it's about building rapport. So I really want to find out who this person is, what makes them tick. And to be able to do that, I need to get them to go quite deep. So I give them these 15 very reflective questions to go away and really make some time to not distract themselves, to just sit down so it's just them and these questions, and really have a deep reflection on and who they are right now, because we need to start with who the person is right now. Just like we talk about the C19 leadership development, we need to talk about right now, and we move forward from now. We don't have to bring what is in our past. We can bring the best parts of it and the learning from it, but we want that snapshot to go, let's take ourselves forward from now.
I just wanted to add to what Gail was saying as well, and to answer your question. It's really interesting if you ask that there's a set of questions that we can get to have people reflect deeply. And similar to Gail, I have a pre-coaching questionnaire, which is again very thorough and talks about all areas of your life and relationship, and that information is discussed in the first session. But beyond that, it's almost no question fits all, and no question fits every situation, right? That's where the power of coaching comes in, and that's where the power of a coach comes in, to be there in the moment and get you to actually think through what it is you're saying and why you're saying it. So yeah, so it's just to add a little bit more to what Gail was already mentioning as well.
So, okay. And once you come to the realization of where you're at, there's obviously actions that need to be taken. How do you actually set timeframes for some of these actions, or how do you ensure progress and the people are actually acting on their insights?
So that's where the accountability aspect of coaching comes in. A lot of the work is done by the client themselves, but we do offer to be accountability buddies, as we refer to the term. And the timeline again is set by the client. What they want to do by a certain time is set by the client. There's a lot of times where the client says, I'm very aware of it and want to do nothing about it. And that's totally fine as well.
Okay.
Right? So on the flip side to the example that Gail just gave with her client, who was a very type A personality and wanted to keep going, and after having coaching sessions with Gail, realized what it was that he needed to do in order to become even better. My client, on the other hand, knew exactly what he wanted to do and knew exactly what he had to do to slow down, knew that he was still giving from a near empty cup, but at the end of the day wanted to continue on like that. He chose not to make a change. But what he did decide was that there were ways that he could start tweaking certain things that he did in his life that would actually make him perform even better. So he would continue to be that type A person because that's where his comfort was, and that's where he felt his growth was, and that's where he felt he was best. But instead, what he ended up doing was he introduced the concept of journaling a little bit before he would go in for meetings. So he was clearer on how he wanted the meeting to be run, and he was more efficient in that meeting, got his point forward in a more efficient way, and ended up saving time on the latter end of that discussion. He started doing things like going for a run early in the morning, because that helped him clear his mind and it helped him go to work with a happy attitude. So it was still making those changes, but in his mind, he was still physically doing something. He was either writing or he was either running, and those things just felt more natural to him because of that type A personality he was.
Right. I'm curious. So you're talking about being accountability buddies with some of your potential clients, helping them make progress. But we also talked about culture and transforming the culture within an organization. Would it not make sense to enable the leadership team within the organization to perform such a role amongst themselves?
Most
Absolutely.
definitely. Yeah, exactly. Because we've talked a lot about role modeling throughout this whole discussion with you. And when a leader can show their team that they're changing habits, that they're modeling good, positive behaviors, they're taking care of themselves, they're allowing for collaborative working, and they're creating this culture that we've talked about. Accountability is exactly the same. So if we work with leaders and we become their accountability partners, we want them to embrace that within their team. So you could call that as well, and some organizations will say that's what mentoring is about, where leaders might mentor emerging leaders who are working their way through the organization. But accountability is that one step more, where mentoring is, yes, it's about helping somebody and advising and showing somebody how it's already been done and bringing and building those strengths in people. But accountability is that prompt that I know has been so hugely successful throughout my career, and I encourage it in all of my clients, because it goes back to being that snapshot in time again that I talked about. Kavita and I do this with each other, and I have other accountability partners across the world that I work with when we're working on specific things. If you want to nail a specific goal and you have somebody in your corner who's got your back, but that person will also challenge you to achieve the goal that you want to achieve, that's where accountability comes in. An accountability partner is not somebody who's just going to listen to you, have that chat with you once a week or once every fortnight and say, yeah, how's everything going? That person needs to be somebody who is going to challenge you, who's going to say, why didn't you achieve what you set out to achieve? What did you allow to get in the way? So it's almost like they take on a coaching style of their own to bring out, and we show people and teach people how to become successful accountability buddies as well. And it's saying to them, how will you challenge that person? How will you keep driving? And then it's a mutually supportive relationship as well, because you reciprocate the same to your accountability partner. You challenge them, you build them up, you keep them accountable. But what I've found through my experience with accountability, and this works at all levels, so when we talk to leaders and encourage that within their cultures, or I talk with my one-to-one clients, is saying to them that you want to work on one key thing at a time. If you try and cloud your accountability meetings with more than one thing, you're going to fail at the start. So if you can, it's a very specific one focus, one challenge, one outcome focus, and then you stand a much better chance of really committing to and achieving the goals that you set out to achieve.
I'm not sure if this quite fits in, but in thinking about what you were saying and thinking about the culture, earlier on we talked about addressing people's motivations as in positions of leadership. What happens when someone's motivations aren't necessarily best aligned with the position that they have? Does that mean that they move into a different role or step away? Is there a transition process that you would recommend for such a team? Because if we are to go down this path of accountability and really building people up or each other up, that would entail that really our motivations need to be aligned. Wouldn't that be the case?
Absolutely. And interestingly, I am working with one such leader right now. She has realized that, and specifically through this past year, she has realized that it just mentally and physically exhausts her to the extent of drains her to be a people leader and to be the kind of people leader that she knows she needs to be in order to pull her team up from where they're at right now. And the idea, though, is that she is taking the time to really understand this about herself. She is taking the time to understand where her impatience sometimes stems from when she's in the midst of these conversations. And through our work, for example, we're taking 2.5-hour one-on-ones and trying to limit it to 30-minute one-on-ones and see how she does with that. So she's starting to do better. So the 2.5-hour initially changed to an hour, and that was still a little bit draining. And now we're currently working with 30-minute one-on-ones where the onus is more on the team member to bring topics to talk about versus the team leader sit down and say, okay, we're talking about A, B, and C. So she's starting to empower her team a little bit more. She has been spoon feeding a lot, which is what has been draining her. And now we're trying to figure out whether it was the spoon feeding that was draining her or whether she's just not the leader she wants to be and she just can't be it. So it's a work in progress. Maybe if we have a part 2 of this conversation, depending on when that is, I could provide more insight. But the idea, again, Vinay, is to just be aware of what it is you want to do, of why you're doing, so that you're not an accidental leader. You're a conscious leader, right? Because if anything through this pandemic, we have realized that we all look to leaders, whether they know the way or not, whether this is a leader in our workspace or a leader of a country. When there is uncertainty around us, we all look to leaders and expect them to have an answer. So it's about then stepping up to that role.
Okay, no worries. So
Lovely.
Adapt quickly is, I believe, the next pillar.
Lovely. Gail, I'll give you this one.
Yes, that's my baby, isn't it? We've been invited to quite a number of interviews and panel discussions lately, and I spoke at a summit. We both spoke at a summit in Singapore in February. So adapting quickly is about being flexible and responsive. So this, I think, has been one of those real standout leadership traits that we have seen happen globally in the last year. And it's all about the leaders who have enabled themselves to be responsive. The governments of the world have changed their directives in the flash of a moment. And so the leaders who have performed well and have been able to be very flexible and responsive have shown that even though this chaos is going on, by being flexible and responsive to the needs of their people. And again, this comes back to the people focus of organisations. They are the ones who have shone through, and their teams feel best supported, and their teams are not burning out, and they're not suffering with some of the mental health issues that a lot of employees globally are coming to. So the story I just wanted to share to illustrate that point is a client of mine in the UK who is in the health industry. So they're frontline key workers. And they have had a very successful company for the last 21 years. I've been working with them for the last 5 years as their performance coach. And very quickly, because of the changing nature of the work that they were delivering, they were going into people's homes and they were having to have PPE and all of the things that we've heard a lot about in the press. And what they were finding is, because their team of engineers work remotely, they had to really engage and check in with their teams. So by adapting to the changing government directives, it meant also that the director and his wife took on the role to actually make time to check in with their staff. So they were being flexible to meet the needs, the changing needs of their staff, who then had their families to consider. Children were going to be at home and working. They were managing school at home. And so there was a lot of chaos going in the lives of their teams, but they were responsive to that, and they were always putting the care of their teams first. And in all the years that I've known them and worked with them, I've seen this thread. It's been the thread that has built and is at the heart of their company as well. They have always put their people first. And so what this showed me through the pandemic was, it wasn't a change in how they did it, but it was an elevation in the way that they did it. So it was a deeper sense of, how are you? So it was taking that question of how are you to the next level. And so by being responsive and being adaptive, being able to adapt quickly, it meant that the team trusted and continued to trust and know they were well supported by the director and his wife. And it is a huge story of success that I've been privileged to be part of, to watch this team grow. And as a result of it, they have actually grown through the pandemic and were able to take on 2 new members of staff. So they have increased the profits in the company, increased that turnover, and been able to employ more people. So they have witnessed a lot of growth personally and as a company too.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaways from what you just shared would be empathy is key to this, as
Most
is
definitely.
communication. Because is there anything else that you would add to this particular pillar in terms of elements?
No, most definitely the empathy. And as I said, they were historically very empathetic leaders in the organisation, but it was the clarity of communication. As I said, that linked directly to the changing government directives, the changing requirements, the policies, everything that was going on. But keeping abreast of all of that, and clearly and in a timely way communicating that to their staff, so that they were always kept abreast. So it was almost like their own channel of news to their staff, but in a very positive and a caring way.
Certainly. Look out for part 2 of this Depart conversation with Gail and Kavita, which will be available shortly.